Great. Hello, everybody. Now, do I have a clicker maybe? I need one of those. Let's see, that looks easy. Great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some trends that we see in disruption. We publish a piece of research every year which tries to predict the future. It's generally, well, we give ourselves 6 or 7 out of 10 each year, so humble and not entirely perfect, but I've picked 5 of those that I think would be interesting to touch on. So where we see disruption happening day to day. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about unicorns and mythical beasts that actually are becoming more real day to day, more real certainly in the Valley. And a unicorn is a technology business which is been created since 2000. They're focused on the technology sector, and they're now worth more than $1 billion. And of course, if you think about unicorns in the Valley, of course, it's all household names. We all know about these big superstar tech companies. But I want to localize the discussion about disruption, because it's these unicorns that are being disruptive to our continent in Europe, in the UK, and also in the Northwest. So I'm going to try and localize and personalize a little bit the discussion around what disruption really means. And this is logos of the 40 unicorns we have in Europe today, spanning both consumer, internet, and enterprise software businesses and hardware businesses. And we're an advisory firm that tries to help build unicorns. And we've had an opportunity to work with businesses like Shazam and Spotify, King, and a number of other household names. But there's a whole bunch of companies that we haven't yet had a chance to touch, and I guess that's our passion. Our passion is to work with more and more of these businesses. So let's think about technology for a second, and I guess my world, perhaps unfortunately, like much of the world of the other speakers, is in and around software. And of course, in Manchester today, it's a shame that I'm not talking about life sciences, where we have fantastic disruption happening right up the Oxford corridor. I'm not talking about graphene. It's not an area I'm familiar with, so hopefully other speakers can touch on that because there's a lot of disruption going on elsewhere. But for me, what I see in technology is that there have been some very seminal steps that have allowed disruption to take place. Right at the beginning, the low-hanging fruits, people talking to each other, messaging, imaging, search. But then, of course, we've had big leaps, typically the bandwidth leap that Lawrence's business and others have been so helpful in creating. And that's allowed much more efficient social networks. It's allowed marketplaces. It's allowed online gaming. It's allowed businesses to sell more online because customers can connect and react and talk to their suppliers more easily. And then the next big step, I guess, was the smartphone, epitomized, of course, by the iPhone. And there we've seen opportunities, tremendous opportunities in health, tremendous opportunities now in and around medicine, and I think, to be honest, a revolution, an Arab Spring revolution was brought about through the smartphone. So we're seeing disruptive at a political and economic level. And now, of course, Ian spoke a lot about the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything, and there's tremendous opportunities here in connecting everything together. And then hopefully, through disruption, we're going to take care of some important things, some basic needs, some energy needs, some water needs, some food needs. Of course, it's great if the NASDAQ goes up to the stratosphere, but hopefully we'll find time to connect those 2/3 of the world together and do something useful for them. And again, for me, disruption is about speed. And this is a really interesting slide because when Walmart was created, it took them 35 years to get to $1 billion in revenues, which seems like a ridiculously long time then. I mean, back then, of course, it was like the speed of light. And now, if you look at Microsoft, it took them 15 years, it took Google 8 years, and by all accounts, it's going to take Google 5 years to get to $10 billion of revenue. I mean, this is ridiculous speed that we're talking about here. And so, of course, the opportunity for entrepreneurs in the room is to create tremendous value, both for yourselves, for your employees, for your shareholders. And that's super exciting, but it's frightening too. I mean, if you're Getaxi or you're Halo, there you were thinking you were on a journey to create a billion-dollar unicorn yourself. And perhaps that's no longer the case. In 2000, Nokia was worth $200 billion, and now it's a little bit of Microsoft, and the rest of it's worth a couple of billion. So the opportunities to create great value through disruption are there, but the dangers are just around the corner. So I'm going to talk about 5 trends that I think are particularly interesting today. And of course, an opportunity in a disruptive trend allows entrepreneurs to raise money. It allows entrepreneurs to perhaps ultimately sell their business and change their own lives. So these are my 5 disruptive trends. So the first, I think, is perhaps less about connecting everything together, because I think we've done a lot of that. And I've had these sports bands, whether it's Fuel or Fitbit that just IPO'd. And actually, in the main, at least last year, the data was incredibly dull. I mean, it's boring. I mean, once I know how often I sleep at night and how often I leave the house, and I mean, it's kind of data I already knew. It's not helping me live my life any better. It's certainly not getting me any fitter. So I think it's about making this data more personal. It's about making the data smarter. And of course, software is a key part of that. If you've recently taken the dangerous step of uploading and upgrading your iOS operating system to iOS 9, which is always a scary thing to do because it generally screws up your phone for about a week. But the exciting thing this time around was that just by tweaking the software, you managed to increase the battery life by a whole hour. And in fact, Tesla, when they upgraded their latest operating system for their sports car, not by changing the ergonomics of the car, not by changing the power of the engine, but just by changing the software, they managed to get from 0 to 60 in a second faster. So a lot about the software is going to be very critical here. And I think we'll find the Internet of Things, the obvious areas like wearables, but moving into the connected home and into the connected car, as we saw with the Bugatti example. So these are very big bets in the Internet of Things, but my sense, like a lot of technology, is that it takes longer than you think for things to come into, particularly the consumer domain. So smart devices, not devices just for the hell of it, and data just for the hell of it, but smart data and smart devices, I think, are going to be very important. So here's a hoodie, a hacker, cybersecurity. So when we started our business in 2000, and probably between 2000 and 2005, of course, the internet was at the beginning of its life. You know, we were all just starting to send emails. We were sending each other texts. And security was a huge concern back then. And what happened was there was a bunch of research and development done, a bunch of innovation, and some small companies got created and they got swallowed up. And then these bigger companies, these bigger security software companies were created, and then they bought each other. And then really for a period of not quite a decade, but certainly 5 years, the whole security industry was suffering from massive indigestion. They'd all swallowed each other up, and nobody was inventing new things, new ways to tackle security issues. And these are security issues both for companies, where employees actually are the most challenging people to keep secure, not because employees are stealing our stuff on purpose, but just because we don't have the infrastructure and the systems in place to control the access that they have to our own proprietary data and confidential information. So both consumers and companies are going to be a critical part of this. And I came to a very interesting site the other day, actually, which is like called Hackers List. It's like Hackers Are Us. It's actually a marketplace for hackers. So if you want to change your kids' grades, or you want to hack someone's Facebook account, you can hire a hacker. You can go onto this site right now, and you can pay $500, and you can list exactly what you want them to do, and maybe they'll have a chance of pulling that off. So this is a pretty scary thing that's around right now. I mean, it's a very dangerous thing. It's an exciting thing, of course, and it'll probably be very profitable because the marketplace model on the internet is the most profitable part of the internet to be on. But I think we're finding that security issues like this are all pervasive now. And because there's been so little research and development done in the last 5 years, you're going to find that there's a lot of consolidation again starting to begin, because the venture capitalists have been seeing this. They can see the worry on the faces of the corporates and of the individual. How do we protect ourselves? And they've started to invest aggressively here, and in due course there'll be a lot of businesses that are bought and acquired in this space. So, Internet of Things, smart devices, cybersecurity, protect yourselves, both as individuals and companies. And then this guy, who knows who this is? I'm looking at the age of the audience. Yeah, that's Paul. PewDiePie. It's PewDiePie. So what? I can see most of you thinking, who the hell is he? Well, he's 25. He's a video blogger. He's actually a gamer. And he mostly creates videos of himself playing computer games. My kids, my eldest is 10, she's a big fan. And in fact, he has a lot of fans. He has 37 million fans, in fact, that watch him, maybe not every day, but I think an active user is probably someone who spends an hour a month watching what he's up to. And he's making $7.5 million a year. This guy, just this guy, him, and the webcam and the PC. So if you're in the media sector, and there's a bunch of people like that, people that are filming themselves, making recipes and cooking. There's people filming themselves doing makeup. There's all sorts of stuff going on here. If you're a media company, if you're Disney, or you're Sony, or you're in Hollywood, how do you compete with this? I mean, this is totally disruptive. And they have no costs. There's no superstars. There's no Brad Pitts to pay. It doesn't take $100 million and 5 years to create the product. So I think you're going to find in the media sector, there's a tremendous number of new media outlets that are going to develop. And they're happening really, really fast. And if you look at the media consumption behavior of your kids, I mean, you say to them, this is a mouse, and they pick it up, and they look at the mouse, and they think, what is that? I mean, my 5-year-old is not interested in that. I mean, what they're interested in is touch. They're interested in instant gratification. They're interested in touch screens. And I mean, my 5-year-old mostly throws that at his elder sister. So things are changing in that generation really fast. And that digital generation are now coming into positions of tremendous power. And I'll come on to later the youthfulness of the unicorns that have been created. So, 3D printing. I wanted to show you something. I don't know, Luke, if you've got that. And I just want to show you something, so maybe you can put it on the live stream. So, is that working? Can you see that? Maybe you can't. So this is a 3D figurine of me. It's unbelievably accurate. In fact, it even has my bald patch at the top, which was unfortunate. But this took 12 seconds to create. And it's very funny because I think in the first speech, Lawrence also mentioned Asda. So I can't imagine that Asda has ever been mentioned twice in a disruption conference. But at Asda today, you can go and get a 3D print of yourself done. And I thought this would be rubbish. Actually, it's amazingly good. So what you're seeing with 3D printing now is it's moving out of industrial and manufacturing applications and actually into consumers' lives. So for £60 and 12 seconds of your life, you can go into Asda. There's one at the Trafford Centre, and you can get yourself a print done. And I created 2 of these, one to sit on Luke's desk, so I can just keep an eye on him. And the second one, I got home late and I brought it home. And my kids were all asleep. And I'd left early in the morning, and my wife said, I shrunk Daddy overnight. It was that accurate. And I have 3 kids. My 8-year-old said, does he have a squeaky voice? And the answer to that was no. And then my son said, it can't be Daddy. He doesn't have his mobile phone. So that was pretty depressing, actually. I was quite sad about that. I didn't give up my job straight away, but anyway, 3D printing, I think we're moving from prototyping and industrial uses right into our everyday lives. I encourage you to get one of those done. They're great. And then we're going to talk just briefly about payments. And I think if you're transacting online, you've got to be spending time thinking about payments. How can you make your customers interact with you, buy from you in an easier way? We're seeing that with Apple Pay. There have been a whole bunch of technologies that are allowing customers to use alternative methods of payment, and your businesses have to be all over that. Alternative payments are growing at a tremendous rate. Next year, it could be 50% of all payments that are made are using alternative payments. So by that, I mean using mobile wallets, using PayPal, using businesses like Klarna, so not using cash and not using credit cards and not using direct debits and standing orders. So it's very noisy, it's very confusing. For small businesses, it feels very expensive. But I think if you talk to your customers, you'll find out how important it is that you can give them a simple and effective and cheap, in many cases these solutions are much cheaper, way to transact with you. So let's talk about the unicorns for a second. So in Europe today, because I'm only interested in Europe, we have 40 unicorns, which is much more than people would say. So again, these are billion-dollar companies created since 2000. There were 30 last year, so we've created 10 net additions, 13 new ones, and then we've had 3 that have dropped off the unicorns. They haven't been as successful this year as many of the others. And the new unicorns are coming in at the bottom. The average value of the unicorns in Europe is $3 billion. And we're creating them in the north, if you have a very general definition of the north, which is important if we're going to try and compete with the hubris of London. Then my definition of the north would include Scotland. So we have FanDuel, which is a fantasy games business out of Scotland. We have Skyscanner, also in Edinburgh. And we have AO.com here in Bolton. So we're doing pretty well. And actually, if you look at the countries in Europe about who's doing the best, the UK has created 17 of the 40 unicorns, so the UK is doing pretty well. But actually, the North's doing pretty well too. I mean, we've created 3. Russia, it's 140 million people in Russia. They've only created 4. The French, it's always good to be on a par with the French. I've added some other stuff, so we're much taller than the French. They've created BlaBlaCar, which is a network to revolutionize the way in which people use spare space in their cars, traveling from A to B. Criteo, which is in the ad tech space. And then Vente Privée, which is an online fashion business. But interestingly, in the north, if we loosen the definition a little bit, we have a whole bunch of superstar tech companies right here, right around the corner. I mean, Sage is the biggest, out in Newcastle, dominant for many years in the software for enterprises space, particularly small businesses. We have Autotrader, started right here in Manchester. We have Pace in Leeds. Money Supermarket in Chester, Skybet also in Leeds. So if you add all of that lot together, we've got some pretty big unicorns, worth $22 billion just around the corner. And so I think we should be very cognizant of that and celebrate that to some degree. But what we can see is that the UK is a unicorn champ. Actually, I always debate this because we started our business with 2 Brits and 2 Swedes. And they would argue, actually, the Swedes are the best because they create more billion-dollar tech companies per capita. And investment bankers always like fighting about who's number 1. But I think it's clear that the UK is doing very well. There's a lot more to do, and we're doing pretty well here in the north. But there's a lot to do. If you added up all those 40 companies, the value is $116 billion. Apple will probably be the first company to hit $1 trillion in market cap, and Facebook is 230. Even Uber, just by themselves, are worth 50, and our northern guys are only worth 4. So there's plenty of work still to do here. But where are these unicorns? What industries are they finding easy to disrupt? So the financial services is probably the one that's getting nibbled away at the most, particularly in London. We're seeing a large number of fintech businesses created. They're nibbling away at the city. Computer games, I'm sure hear more from Paul a bit more about that, but King.com has revolutionized what Electronic Arts and others were doing. And e-commerce, an area that in the north is really close to our hearts. We have fantastic heritage in retail, and we are, in this region, disrupting the e-commerce industry with great businesses like AO and The Hut and Boohoo, Misguided. So we have to make sure we focus on the things that we're really good at when we're creating these large businesses. But what we're not very good at in Europe is creating these huge participation businesses, these audience businesses, like a Facebook or a WhatsApp. And I think that's partly geographic. I don't think that's just down to our lack of skill or entrepreneurship in these areas. But those audience businesses are easier in the US if there's 240 million people that speak the same language. So maybe we're never going to be brilliant at that. But I think we can be disruptive for a long, long time in e-commerce, in enterprise software, and obviously in the fintech space. And then how old do you need to be? I mean, what's the data about this? And the reality is that of those 40 unicorns, many of them have been started by founders in their 30s. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you're over 40, you should stop. You'll never get there. But the data isn't very encouraging, I have to say. They tend to be founded by experienced entrepreneurs. So they're not MBA grads with a business plan starting out. They've probably failed once or twice before. And I'm sure they've built a very successful board of serious businessmen and businesswomen around them. The average age is 35. But if you look at one of the new entrants, a business called Funding Circle, that in fact many of you in the room may well have used to borrow money instead of going to your high street bank. The founder of that business, he started it in 2009, was 22. So we hear a lot about the youthfulness of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, but there's a lot of that going on in the UK today. 22 is phenomenal to now be, I guess he's 26 and running Funding Circle. And try and keep the founders together. The data suggests that disruptive businesses are more successful if the founders spend more and more time together, not less and less time together. And I think that's really, really important. There's a lots of debate about whether you should, as an investor in a business, switch the CEO or move the founder out, or they're being too disruptive. But of course they're being disruptive. That's the whole point. And a founding team, if managed and coerced somehow and kept together, incentivized to stay together, is going to be more successful. There's very good evidence for that. 52% of these 40 superstar businesses, all the founders are still in there. Of course, they're not all co-CEOs. They're all founders. But the company has made a huge effort to put the right guy as the visionary guy, to put the right person to run the trade shows, to put the sales guy in the right spot, so that they separate as the company gets bigger and bigger, the responsibility of running this fast-growing business. And, Rome wasn't built in a day, of course. It takes a long time. And as you'll see in the next slide, it also takes a lot of money. The time to a liquidity event is very long. So a liquidity event, a sale of your business or an IPO, it's well over 8 years. But it is shortening. So you have to be patient. It's very, very important not to rush a disruptive business. There's a sense that you need to run fast, and of course you do. But don't rush. And to think that you can, in this day and age, when what you see Uber have done, I think they've raised $3 billion since they started to get to $10 billion of revenue. If you're trying to grow quickly and be disruptive, you are going to need to raise capital. There There is evidence that you don't need to raise too much. I mean, 20% of the businesses like AO, like Skyscanner and others have raised less than $50 million to create a disruptive businesses. But the average is much more like $150 million. So bear that in mind and think through if this is a journey you want to go on, because bringing capital into a business is always a dangerous thing to do. It's a marriage that can sometimes end up in divorce. So you definitely need to be patient, and you definitely need to raise a lot of money. And what you can see here is back to this momentum slide, I think, which is that the older businesses have raised less money. So this is the age of the unicorn here. And this is the value of the unicorn on the left axis. And you're seeing that the newer unicorns are raising much more money than the unicorns that were created 10 or 15 years ago. And I think that's back to the importance of speed. Not to rush, but that if you're going to move quickly, if you're going to disrupt an established industry, you're going to need a little bit of help. And then last couple of slides, really, I'm very keen on trying to think about the future. So who in the Northwest could become $1 billion company? We've spent a lot of time going out and meeting businesses. I'm not saying that these are going to be the next ones, but this is our view. We have some fantastic companies here. Avecto in the security software space, dealing with employee breaches. Blue Prism, it's a fantastic software business. They will talk about software robots. So not your hardware robots, but using software to automate clerical issues within businesses and clerical processes. We have NCC Group, which is probably the most mature here, already worth £500 million. And then we have younger companies that are growing very quickly. Reality Mind, that's trying to disrupt the market research space. And Zuto, who are trying to disrupt online car finance. And if you want to follow these companies and all of the other companies in this region that are trying to be disruptive, or if you want to make sure that we cover you and talk about you, then take a look at the Northern Tech Map. It's totally free. It's available. We upload the businesses we meet into that, and we would encourage you to, if you have an interest in who's disrupting who out of this region, then spend a little bit of time on that. So with that, thank you very much.
Bang on, Hugh. 10 to 11, great. Sadly, no time for questions. I'd like to ask how you differentiate a unicorn from a horse in a funny hat, but I'm sure you have some techniques doing that. Right, last in this session this morning before we let you all go for some coffee.